political processes that are key for sustainable food systems transformation are connected, are coherent, are well coordinated. And third, we need indeed increased and sustained fiscal and external financial resources, short and long term. And as CAADP paved the way for public commitment to financing agriculture, the international community should respond to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' proposed SDG stimulus plan, a plan through which the Secretary General has called richer countries to funnel an extra 500 billion each year towards financing the Sustainable Development Goals, and is calling for the international financial system to be transformed to be fit for this challenge. Concluding, Excellencies, it is imperative that we connect our efforts, the efforts of our governments, those of the United Nations family, of the international financial institutions, also of the grassroots organizations, NGOs, social movements, the business community and private sector, the research institutions, connect them towards the titanic yet achievable effort of food systems transformation. And this is exactly what the Committee on World Food Security of the United Nations, I have the honor of chairing, aims to do. Excellencies, colleagues, together we can make it, we can succeed. And as I approach the end of my mandate as CFS chairperson later in October, to bear the torch to my successor, which will be a newly elected African chairperson, I wish to conclude my remarks thanking once again Dr. Agnes Kalibata, President of AGRA, all of you ministers and stakeholders here today, and encourage you to keep up and strengthen your leadership within the Committee on World Food Security of the United Nations and elsewhere for a zero hunger and zero malnutrition African-built world. I look forward to seeing you in person in Rome soon at the ministerial segment of the 51st plenary session of the Committee on World Food Security on October 24th, where the committee will deliberate on the impact of this crisis and on the policy responses to this situation towards food systems transformation. Once again, thank you very much indeed.
We are going to count down to the launch of the Africa Agriculture Status Report. That will happen within the next 1 hour or 90 minutes, and we will do that countdown together online and also in our conference space. But to give us a preview of what is in that status report, we have one of the lead authors with us to help us unpack it, understand it, why it is so important. Dr. John Olumwengu, please come and join me at this podium. Thank you. Dr. Olumwengu is from the IFPRI. He is one of the senior researchers. Dr. Olumwengu, how many pages are in the report?
Thank you, Femi. So let me quickly take you through the report for this year. Empowering Africa Food System for the Future is the theme of this year's report. Think of food system as a car, and that Africa's car is broken and needs some fixing. So the way we... Okay, this thing is... I have some problem, but we can run it through. So what to expect from the report? First, when you look through the report, we took a forward-looking approach, which means that throughout the report, we are trying to answer a very simple question. Why to empower Africa food system? The target, the aim to that empowerment is to achieve sustainable, healthy diet for all Africans. However, unless we understand what or where we are recovering from, we cannot find the path for recovery. And that's why in the report there are 3 chapters that focus on the state, analyzing the state of Africa food system. Where is Africa with respect to a certain goal? Where is Africa? Where are the point of failures, the point of weaknesses throughout the food system? And let me walk you through some of the highlights. First, when we look throughout the system, from access to inputs all the way to consumptions, Africa food system is failing almost everywhere. But the point is not to highlight the failures, because as far as the report is concerned, so the point is not to only highlight the point of failures, but also identify the areas that need interventions. Some reviewers thought that these 3 chapters on assessing where the system are, were too gloomy. But that's exactly the point. So we didn't want to sugarcoat the fact, but to highlight the point of failures so that we can also point to the key areas of interventions. So there are hope in the report, and the hope is introduced through 2 key drivers. The first one is the African Continental Free Trade Area as a driver of food system transformation in Africa. That the ACFTA is a single continental market with a population of about 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. Based on a recent study by the World Bank that came out last year, Africa is expecting to double foreign direct investment under the agreement. And the same is also will expect to happen in terms of real income. Real income will increase by 9%. It is true that the agreement is not all about food system, but the question is how African food system can leverage this boost in terms of demand. The next channel of hope is coming through demographic dividend. As the continent will add 200 million people, and by 2050, 800 million people. And I know there are the highlights that this may be a ticking bomb for Africa. But as far as the report is concerned, we took a different view, looking at this demographic dividend more as an opportunity that can happen if we invest in labor productivity, in human capital, invest in technology, invest in knowledge and innovation. As someone put it, that if the right investment in labor productivity are made, human capital could be the Africa greatest asset. But of course, as I said, the potential in the agreement, the potential in demographic dividend are not enough unless we invest. And one of the key areas in the report that we are highlighting is investing in knowledge and innovation. We need to invest in how we can produce differently, package differently, store differently, distribute differently. All of that require additional knowledge and innovation. And one that I wanted to highlight here is the digital revolution to empower Africa's system for the future. It's already happening. Digital revolution is not only improving communication, but it's also transforming businesses, transforming education, transforming health. So the idea is, how can Africa leverage this digital transformation to boost, to empower its food system? The food system of the future will be driven, will be led by the youth. And so we need to make it attractive, we need to infuse a degree of technology into food system, and through digital transformation. Investment in knowledge, investment in innovation, digital transformation, all of that will require financing. And when you look at the food system as a whole, I think the financing component is the weakest link of the system. And this is where we need a change. When we call it a financial shift is needed. Less than 5% of total credit portfolio volume in most African countries is invested in agricultural sector. Many African countries are still failing to achieve the Maputo Declaration, Maputo Commitment, Maputo Declaration. Less than 20% of funding need for African agriculture SMEs is met. So we need innovative financing, from microfinancing for small orders farmers to public-private partnership. We need refreshed, accessible, and sustainable financing model to empower Africa food system. So let me finish with this, that the challenge faced by Africa food system provide a clear call for a concerted response from government, the private sector, communities, and individuals alike. This is not a one institution show, a one-man show. It has to be all of us coming together. We cannot expect a resilient, sustainable, and inclusive Africa food system for the future while we continue business as usual. The time for action is now. Thank you.
What would a panel discussion look like if we're talking about the Africa agricultural status right now? We are about to find out. For the panel, please make your way to the stage. Thank you very much, I appreciate you. And we're looking at multiple stakeholders, collaborations, and partners. And I'm going to invite all of the panelists to join us on stage for the first panel, the first discussion. Please take a seat. Dr. Schengen Fan, Dr. Simeon Elwi, Ms. Daj, Professor Braun, Mr. Kasiri. Professor Braun, sit a little bit closer. Very good. I am going to ask you one by one to do your full introductions in one sentence. Is that possible? Let us start with Dr. Fan. Good to see you, Dr. Fan. Please say hello to our delegates in the room and also online.
Well, I'm Schengen Fan, Chair Professor at the China Agricultural University. So why I'm here? Because the challenge we face today is global. And the solutions must also be found together. So that's the reason why I came very far from Beijing to attend this conference.
Dr. Ooi, so good to see you. Caribou, welcome, good morning. Press your button on your microphone and in one sentence tell everybody who you are, why you're important to be in the very first panel of our Food Systems Forum.
I couldn't hear very well. Can you repeat that one? The sound. Can you repeat it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Very easy question to start off with.
Yeah, okay.
Introduction.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Interesting question. I'm Simeon Ewi, and I am the Director General of the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture and Regional Director of the CGIAR for Africa, continental Africa. I'm here today because I want to be able to talk about the importance of leveraging science for improving food systems in Africa. It's very important. Science is important because to be able to bridge the gap between the needs, okay, and what's available, you need science. So that's what I would like to talk about.
Looking forward to it. Ms. Daj, good to see you. Please greet the delegates.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sodfa Daji. I'm the Program Director of FULEAD, the Africa Youth Leadership Program, which is a joint program of MS Training Center for Development Cooperation and East African Community Secretariat in Arusha. And I'm here today because I want to highlight how important and crucial is the role of youth in food system transformation. Thank you.
Professor Braun, it is good to have you here on stage. Thank you for bringing your work with you. I love that you're on stage with a laptop. We are rolling up our sleeves, ready to work immediately. Please greet the delegates.
I promise I do not make emails from here. I'm Joachim von Braun, professor at Bonn University, member of the AGRA board. I'm here because you are here to meet friends and colleagues who care about the future of food and agriculture in Africa.
Mr. Kasiri, welcome. Please greet the delegates.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Omid. I am an aspiring successful farmer, which is why I also double hat as the leading McKinsey's agriculture practice in Africa. I was reminded last night at the airport by one of the other delegates that if you have a passion or commitment for agriculture and food on the continent, then come rain or otherwise, once a year, this is where you are going to be. But I'm also really inspired by some of the incredible things that many of the delegates are doing and excited to be part of that.
Dr. Fan, if we are looking at lessons learned from other regions that have transformed their food systems, what can we learn that we can apply to this beautiful continent of Africa?
I have 3 points and 3 brief messages all together. Number one is the countries must take on agriculture in the earlier stage of development. This is a lesson we learned from Asia, China, India, even Vietnam. In the 60s, 70s, during the Green Revolution period, these countries invested more than 10% of their national budget to help to promote agricultural growth. CAADP target is still 10% budget allocation or 6% growth. I think Africa must take this on. And equally important is the priorities of this investment to support what John Onwange just mentioned, all these revolutions. So my number 2 message is certain environmental, social, or nutrition health must be taken on in earlier stage. Do not wait. This is the lessons, this is the mistake we learned in Asia. We didn't pay attention to nutrition. We didn't pay attention to environment during, let's say, 70s, 80s, or even 90s. So now today we try to fix the overweight, obesity, environmental problems, carbon emissions. It is very costly. I really hope Africa's food system transformation in its earliest stage this sort of interventions must be taken on earlier. My last message is innovation knowledge will be so critical. I think this forum is indeed the purpose, to bring different stakeholders, farmers, women, youth, scientists from CGIAR or from National Research System, private sector. So we share the knowledge innovation. We can really push the transformation system. So AGRA really plays a very big platform on that. Now a bit more sort of a promotion. In China, from November 2 and 4th, we are going to organize a seminar, probably with a more regional focus, on so-called World Agri-Food System Forum in Beijing. And we will bring different stakeholders. We learn from AGRA how we can really engage different stakeholders to really bring research, innovation down to the farmers. So thank you very much. The 3 brief key messages we learned, I wanted to share with you.
Professor Braun, you look so thoughtful right now. Articulate your thoughts. Yes, Professor Braun.
Acoustics is suffering. You know, we have to talk about risks and opportunities. And let's start with risks. There are opportunities in all these food systems related risks. The Global Risk Report, which comes out annually, puts at the top of global risks the failure to mitigate and adapt to climate change, natural disasters, inflation, so cost of living crisis. All these global risks also apply to Africa. Africa has risk coping capacity, but it needs to be strengthened. When we talk about resilience, we talk about the capacity to bounce back from a bad or unsatisfactory situation, the situation which our colleague John Olumwengo presented. And he presented also already what needs to be done to bounce back. Let me amplify. Resilience requires, in the climate area, 3 things: mitigation, adaptation, and transformation. And for Africa, most relevant is adaptation, adapt the food system to the crisis situation. And what does this mean? Advanced plant breeding, social protection with nutrition components, water use efficiency. So those are key examples. In our report, we say on resilience, essentially 3 things. Strengthen the capacity to grow the food markets, because no resilience without functioning trade and markets. No resilience without enhanced productivity. So markets and productivity, that is where AGRA comes in and serves smallholders and traders. But also ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all. That's a broader social protection agenda. So in sum, mitigation, adaptation, and transformation. Transformation of the economic system to a bioeconomy, as the East African community of countries has already done 2 years ago.
Yes, resilience.
I very much agree with Dr. Joachim von Braun. So because of the shock we have faced for the last several years, climate change, droughts, floods, diseases, including COVID, now obviously geopolitical struggles. So the global food prices have been very vulnerable, very volatile. And we must work together, including the UN Secretary General, to negotiate some of the deals. And as I said, we face common challenges, and the solutions have to come together. Not to, right now we have seen countries begin to use export bans again. This is The Netherlands, we learned for the last several decades, you do not use export bans to restrict the exports at the cost of your farmers, to benefit your consumers, and at the cost of your neighbors, and to benefit your own country. So we must stop this silo approach.
If we are talking about practicalities, Dr. Owe, of transforming Africa's food systems, we have to be inclusive if we're talking about stakeholders, so producers and consumers. How? How do we focus on that?
No, thank you very much, Femi, for this important question. We just heard the brief report on the African Agriculture Status Report, and I think I invite everyone to look at it. But basically speaking, from reading it, there are three areas of focus that I was able to return. Policy reforms, I mentioned it, development of infrastructure, like roads and storage facilities, and adoption of technologies. So your question, Femi, is really how the transformation can be as inclusive as possible. I think it's critical. A few points there that I would like to make. Number one, I think we need to have equitable policy reforms. That's important. And what will be the target? The gender, the youth within the food system need to be targeted. That's how we'll be able to really address, ensure that the 250 million smaller farmers who operate on small plots can benefit from the system transformation. That's number one. The second point I want to mention is also empowering them through skills and knowledge. I think this is also critical. Now, between now and 2050, we're talking about 2.25 billion people in Africa. Now we're talking about 1.3 billion. So these farmers, these people, the farmers who are going to support the food for these people will need to have their capacity built so that they can provide the nutrition needed for the people. Access to resources is critical. And resources is not just money. It's about access to land. It's about access to credit. Okay? It's about access to various means of production. We need to be able to target, them by strata and ensure that they have access to those resources. The technology generation and adoption is critical. Just now, before this session, we had a meeting with the African Development Bank on the Dakar 2. And the question is, how can we translate the technologies that are coming out of science from the research, the CGIAR, the Natural Research Organization, in the hands of people? And that's where, again, we need to ensure that programs are developed so that technologies that are on the shelves, tested, proven, can actually be in the hands of those who are producing. I think it's critically important. I have much more to say, but let me stop at this point now and to say that, and I'll come back to these other points. But there's a lot we can do to make the transformation of the food system very inclusive going forward. Thank you.
So delegates who are watching online around the world, the hashtag is AGRF 2023. So I'm putting this out to you. If you're a young person, if you consider yourself a youth, what innovative strategies do you already have, do you know will work, that will help speed up the transformation of Africa's food systems? If you're here, delegates in the room, if you consider yourself to be a young person, put your hand up right now. Where are the young people in the room? Just a sprinkling, Miss Daj. I am asking you about what is it that the youth of the African continent can do that's innovative to help speed up this transformation of the food systems on the African continent. Just a handful of youth in the room, but I know there are many more who are participating in the forum in the next 4 days. Innovation. Please tell us.
Thank you very much. I think for innovative strategies, I would like to hand over to the youth of the room because they have great stories, which is their stories. But from my side, I would like to outline what came out from the report and some of the insightful points that came out from the other panelists and speakers. Because when we look at the challenges, we look at the challenges from a youth perspective. So there are many youth-led organizations that are doing great work when it comes to food system. We have Agriterra, we have innovation models such as Farmerline, and we have other organizations, including mine, just to outline the work we do, that really supports young people in food system and capacitate their skills and supports access to capital. But the truth is we're facing different challenges that is preventing youth meaningful contribution to food system transformation. Allow me to outline a few which can contribute to the report. So policies are crucial for system transformation. The truth is that we are the youngest continent, but the average age of our leaders is 63. We have an intergenerational gap and we don't have enough platforms where young people, as the great youth here, can speak to their leaders and address their concerns. So I'm glad to see this forum that is getting more and more inclusive. By the way, I do believe inclusivity is costly, so we need to talk about that as well. And so we need intergenerational leadership and increased representation of youth in political institutions, processes, and decision-making. I see here the ambassador at large and the mention of the conference in Roma, so I do hope that young people of Africa are invited and supported before that conference to develop recommendations that speak to their concerns. The second point is digital technology and digital revolution. Only 28% of Africans use the internet, and agri-food systems are enabled by technology, and so we require significant public investments and improved regulations and coherent policy and incentive framework. And the reason I'm mentioning this recommendation is because actually African youth are working to address this recommendation, but we still need a more cross-sectoral engagement. Ethical issues and decent work in food system. Now, this is close to my heart. More and more youth are sensitive and aware to ethical issues, including decent work in food systems. And there is therefore a component of social justice implications, which I believe we need to bring to this forum. And we must integrate the perspective, including inclusivity, but also different realities, climate change, extractivism, protection of the environment, as well as gender inequality and stereotyping. As we speak, I come from a country where the effect of customary law and land inheritance are still a challenge to young women like me. And then youth employment and investment in youth. I was so happy to hear the mention about AFCFTA because indeed it's innovative and a game-changing and improving food security as well. And with the protocol on women and youth, it's clear that we are at the forefront of the change, including in the food system response. However, we need to simplify access to finance, and I think this is the biggest issue that African youth are facing. And so my three recommendations are intergenerational leadership, policies that consider Africa digital revolution, ethical issues and decent work, and access to capital and sustainable funding to enable youth crucial contribution in Africa's food system transformation. Thank you.
So what we are doing on this stage today is just touching on some of the much deeper themes that we will be exploring over the next 4 days, in breakout sessions, in the plenary sessions, in bilateral meetings that you are having as well. Remember, recover, regeneration, and then finally act. Mr. Kasiri, critical strategies that we need to be thinking about in the next 4 days for transformation.
Thank you very much. Strategy is critical. Different countries are solving for different things at different times. We have to think about the livelihoods of the 250 million smallholder farmers. We think about food security. We think about the effects of climate change. And so this ever-changing set of realities means that we have to think about the trade-offs, and those trade-offs means having smart strategy. However, I would posit that even more important than strategy is getting things done. Sometimes strategy gets the results you want, sometimes it doesn't. But once you move into delivery and getting things done, you have momentum, and you can learn, and you can adapt. As we scan the landscape across the continent, we see many pockets of progress that have been made, including where we sit in Tanzania, which is a powerhouse of agriculture regionally. But with the 50-plus countries we have, only 3 or 4 have made a structural, substantial improvement in the performance of their agriculture and food ecosystems. And so it really speaks to the fact that we do need to invest in thinking about how we are going to deliver these strategies. These countries where we've seen this improvement have long-term commitment to the sector. They put resources, both human and financial, behind it, and often make structural changes to ensure that it happens. But as the agriculture and food systems evolve and become more complex, we need to learn to benefit from other models of delivery too. It should not fall squarely on the shoulders of government. Where government puts in place the right policies and the right enabling environment, we see the power of the private sector being unleashed in incredible ways to have significant impact. We speak about the fact that governments are not able to fund their ambitions in this sector. The private sector can unlock multiple times that funding if, again, we create the right environment for them. And also, we really shouldn't put aside the really important role of development partners in implementing, because often in this space, what needs to be worked on is a public good. And where there is a public good, development partners have a very crucial role to play. And so bringing all of these together, the public, the private, and the development partners, with a strong focus on getting things done, I believe, would put our continent in a substantially different place. My wife often reminds me, and she says, Omid, you always seem to have a strategy around how you're going to get your body in shape. I seem to struggle to get it done. And so I'd posture the same is important for our sector.
Mr. Kasiri, Professor Braun, Dr. Hui, Dr. Fan, Ms. Daji, thank you for getting us started on the very first discussion in this very important Africa's Food Systems Forum. Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you. Ashe, thank you. I'm being greeted in Yoruba. That was the first discussion in our plenary session, the official opening plenary ceremony. But we are getting ready for discussion number 2. I am delighted to be sharing the moderating with Ms. Nadine Bossa. Nadine, please come and sit and bring your panel with you. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Nadine Bossa is the Director of the Food Systems Coordination for IFAD, and I will be handing over to you so that you can instruct your panel. Nadine, thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Femi. It's never easy to moderate after you, but I'll try to entertain you as well as she did. So we're going to start with the second part of the opening session, and it's basically food system stock taking. Where do we stand 2 years later? We will not start again. You know that we all convened 2 years ago to commit to food system transformation in Africa. The first global stock take took place 6 weeks ago in Rome and brought leaders, ministers, stakeholders, civil society in Rome to discuss 2 years later, after committing to transforming food system, where do we stand? We don't want to come here every year and hear about potential, the potential of Africa. we have the youngest population in the world. The median age is 20 years old. We have 65% of uncultivated arable land. We have solutions, we have technology, we have research to make hunger, poverty, malnutrition, climate disaster a story of the past. But the theme is recover, regenerate, and act. So, as I said, I don't want to come here every year, meet you, and discuss the potential we have. Because when the potential never materializes, it becomes an issue. So in this session, we are going to discuss what have we done 2 years later. And we will have two distinguished speakers to frame the discussion. Let me call first Mr. Lawrence Haddad to the stage. And many of you know him. He's the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. He's also a renowned thought leader on nutrition and also the World Food Prize winner. So I think you have exactly the right person to start framing the discussion. Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadine, and it's great to be back here. The question that Femi asked the previous panel was a great question, and she asked us, why are you here? So my answer to that question is, this is the place I learn the most every year. This is the place I learn the most, and this is the place where I feel like there's the biggest openness to learning and sharing amongst the participants. So this is where my heart gets lifted up the most every year. So I'm delighted to be back here. The task I was given in a few brief minutes was to make some points about critical parameters for food system transformation. So I have 7 very quick points. So the first thing is to prioritize goals. We know that food systems can do lots of things. They can reduce hunger, reduce malnutrition, improve resilience, accelerate climate action, promote biodiversity, generate jobs, reduce poverty. But it's difficult to do all of these things at the same time. So a government will have to, and a business, and an organization such as GAIN, we have to prioritize what we're going to be doing first. That's very important. Not loud enough. Second, thank you, Nadine, always taking care of me. Second, know your food systems. Is that better? Yes? Second, know your food systems. If I was a policymaker in Africa or anywhere, and I was tasked with developing and transforming my food system, I would be in a panic because I would say, what does my food system look like? And if I need to find out what my food system looks like, I have to go to 30 different sources of data. So we need to develop platforms that bring all food system data together to make it really easy to describe and diagnose a country's food system. GAIN and FAO and others are working on a food system dashboard, and I encourage you to look at that. The third thing, know your resources. I bet you don't know, ministers, how much your government spends on your food system. I bet you, MDs and CEOs, you don't know how much your company spends on food systems. That's because budgets are not constructed around food systems until now. We have the 3FS initiative led by IFAD and the World Bank and others, which is a tool for mapping what you spend and where you spend it, which sectors, which regions, which objectives are being promoted by your current spend. That'll help you figure out where the gaps are and where maybe you're over-investing. I am a big believer in the fact that there's a lot of resources in the food system, but they're just pointing in the wrong direction or they're misallocated. Fourth, develop a plan. Food systems are complex, lots of moving parts, lots of stakeholders. As Omid said in the previous session, strategies and plans aren't everything, but developing a strategy and a plan will help you think through the issues that you need to help through. And I note from the stocktake in Rome a couple of months ago, 37 African countries have a plan, which is fantastic. But that also means that 18 do not. And if you don't have a plan, I think it's really challenging to transform your food system. Fifth, align policies. When you work across sectors, it's really easy to develop a policy that's fantastic for hunger reduction, but is terrible for environmental protection. Or you develop a program that is great for income generation, but terrible for resilience. Or you develop something that's good for nutrition improvement, but is not so good for the environment. If you don't have a way of assessing the coherence of your policies, you're going to be in trouble. And again, I know Academia 2063 is doing some really interesting work on developing a policy coherence tool. 6, develop an ecosystem of support. Governments are obviously key. They set the tone, as Agnes Kalabata said 2 years ago in the Food System Summit. They set the tone, but they can't do everything by themselves. They need an ecosystem of support internally and externally. But we in the ecosystem, we have to make sure this ecosystem is not one of cacophony, but one of symphony. It's not chaotic, but it is coherent. It is not individualistic, but it is collective. And that's a challenge to every one of us in the room. If you are here and you say you support a government, then you better be working with other people who say the same thing. And finally, we need to assess progress. If you don't assess progress, you're flying blind. If you don't assess progress, how can we take anything you say seriously? There isn't a mechanism for assessing progress in food system transformation yet, but there are a number of important initiatives. One of them is you'll see in the State of African Food System report that will be released later today. You'll see it. It's called the Countdown Initiative. It's got 50 indicators that I think are a good starting point for any government who wants to assess its food system. But more important than that, we can't wait for 5 years to see if our food system transformation is working on environment or health or food or nutrition or jobs. We need some progress indicators. We need to see our policies being changed, our resource allocations being changed, our institutions being changed, is data being used. So colleagues, the good news is from this Countdown Initiative, which you see in the report, is that compared to global averages, Africa is doing better or the same in half of those 50 indicators. So I want to echo what John said this morning. It's not all doom and gloom. There's some areas where the rest of the world can look to Africa and learn from Africa. So with that, Nadine, thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. And he started enlightening you on the critical parameters for the food system transformation in the region. I want to call on a renowned also expert from the region, Dr. Jean-Jacques Mohinda, Regional Head of East Africa AGRA. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadine, for the opportunity, and good morning, everyone. So let me pick up from where the previous speaker has just stopped, and actually agree that we are during this conference discussing Africa's food systems transformation in a global challenging situation. And I tend to agree with John that there are actually solutions. In fact, African agricultural transformation and food systems transformation journey in the recent years has been slowed down by multiple shocks, all the way from COVID-19, climate change, and the conflict in Eastern Europe. If you look at some of the critical CAADP Malabo commitment, for instance, on reducing hunger, on accelerating investment, and even poverty eradication. Just to use a few facts and share a few ideas for the next panel to consider, we now have evidence showing that African agricultural productivity growth has been reduced by close to 34% in the last 50 years due to climate change. We also have emerging data and statistics showing that our continent now is home to 1/3 of people facing hunger, if you look at the numbers globally. And the population from this continent that is going to be affected by different climate change hazards in 2050 is going to be close to 1 billion under the 2 degrees Celsius warming scenario. Another probably important statistic, and John mentioned briefly on this, is the reliance on import on some of the food commodities. And if you look at the current statistics and the numbers we have, we're spending nearly 34 billion on 4 agricultural commodities that can be grown in existing food baskets and agroecological zones in the continent, such as wheat, maize, rice, and soybean. And this is a continent where we're still importing close to 90% of fertilizers, spending another close to $5 billion annually on imported fertilizers. And all of this is being worsened by declining development flows in the agricultural sector. If you compare numbers from 2021 and 2022, when we had the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, I want to share a few ideas for the next panel to consider. Number one, if you have to accelerate implementation for the remaining 2 years to the end of the CAADP Malabo in 2025, we need as a continent an integrated plan that brings together investment that promote agricultural productivity, that support infrastructure development for production, for marketing, for value addition, but also investment in climate resilient practices. Number two, we cannot accelerate implementation if we keep implementing in isolation. So I'm proposing the panel to take into consideration the idea of integrating existing continental framework, CAADP, the African Continental Free Trade Area that was mentioned earlier, the Program for Infrastructure Development, the Science and Technology Strategy for Africa known as TISA, including even the framework on AU data policy that can help us tracking like the previous speaker has been mentioning. And all of this in the context of the Africans Agenda 2023, but also the SDGs by 2030. Good enough. The African Common Position Papers on food systems brings all these frameworks together and outlines key priorities and ambition with the expected impact to actually achieve a 1 trillion food industry that provides not only sufficient nutritious food, but also enhances supply chain infrastructure and also creates work opportunities for youth, especially for young women. My last point for the panel to consider is on rethinking the governance of the future African food systems. Today, we cannot continue shying away against some of the emerging trends. For instance, integrating the cutting-edge technologies. We have been hearing about the artificial intelligence, digital technologies, blockchains, e-commerce, and many others. Number two, an integrated plan has also to take into consideration the age, the generational, and the gender employment gaps that exist in the continent today. Of course, taking into consideration food systems approach, but also climate change shocks, water and land degradation. Number three, it has been already mentioned that this is a continent that is home to the world's largest, youngest, and fastest growing population. One of the speakers mentioned about the population doubling to